Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the servant strengthening buffs that happened over the weekend for JP's anniversary. Now, I will be splitting Waver off into his own video. His is a little bit more different and kind of a little bit more important than these, but essentially, we're going to be covering the Caster Umu, the Shakespeare, and the Darius buffs that happened. Now, starting off with Caster Umu here, we did have 2 5-star caster slots available. I'm not surprised to see a support get one of them. I'm also not surprised that it was Waver. He was somebody that kind of needed it after a long period of time. And so then you start considering maybe another damage dealer, and Caster Umu is one of the ones that really comes to mind here. I don't think she was weak by any stretch of the imagination, but I think her primary competition being Ace, Caster Ku, and to a degree, Tiamat had really kind of hurt her. Now, the 5th Append had been rolled out in 9th anniversary on JP, and that actually really did help Caster Umu because her 3rd skill became double uppable in a, double Koyanskaya setup due to this. Something that prior to that point, it had not been capable of doing. This definitely helped out her damage a little bit there, but I think the devs took a look and they said, she's still behind Ace. She's still kind of failing in competition to some of the other people. Let's give her a proper buff, because to me, and I do agree with this assessment by the developers, assuming that's what they did, is that Caster Umu, outside of really this skill with a targetable guts, doesn't really do anything else. There's no niche that she has where she really stands out. She is just a solid AoE damage caster, but doesn't really have any means to stand out from the pack or differentiate herself. The devs say, okay, yeah, hey, you know what? A unit like that does maybe need to be dealing a little bit more damage than someone like Ace that has a lot of like super utility kind of rolling around. So the devs actually end up coming in and giving her a Noble Phantasm upgrade. And this was, I think, a long time coming. You guys can actually see, interestingly enough, she does get the standard NP interlude strengthening where NP2 becomes NP1 and NP5 becomes the new NP2. So definitely nice for her in that regard. She just had ignore invincibility and deals damage to all enemies. Now she still gets those same effects with that standard scaling, but she also manages to increase her own damage against enemies with the beast attribute and threat to humanity by 50% activating first. So this is a power mod. Since it is 1 turn on each of these, this means that naturally it affects the NP as well, but it can also affect things like your again, like carding and stuff after the NP. So it's definitely nice in its versatility. It's maybe not as strong as a super effective buff would have been, but it is what it is, especially given that both of these niches are not very common. So it is a at least interesting thing to see that they gave her 2 instead of just 1. Usually giving 2 niches out of nowhere hasn't happened very much over the years, though I can think of a couple of instances where it has happened. But on top of that, they end up adding in an additional effect that charges the party's NP gauge by 10% after the NP. To be honest, I don't actually feel like the party-wide charge is that big of a deal. I think the major breadwinners here are just the standard NP interlude for strength, as well as some niches. But at the end of the day, who knows? That may be something that helps her out on the back end, especially if you manage to like Brave Chain her or something into a Mighty Chain, try to get some NP on the back end to help her out, and you never know. That sort of thing could really end up helping her. So let's take a look now at Summer Umu's buffs before and after damage here. These are neutral, so these are basically her against a neutral target. These are also self only, so no external buffs coming from like a support caster or anything like that. So basically, Summer Umu under her own power here, as you guys can see, her original damage out here was the 23.8k there at NP1, 31.8k at NP2. And you can see the new normal over here on the right is the 31.8k. So that is the NP2 number becoming NP1. But now we also add in the threat and beast niches. Unfortunately, those aren't going to be necessarily something that you're going to see too often, but there is the possibility of combining them both. So that is a potential deal there for you as well. So it's not a like huge upgrade, but I think they just said, hey, look, let's try to catch her up. You guys can see these would be Caster Umu's numbers in a sort of old format with her old damage output pre-NP interlude there. You guys can see that she has the 2x Koyan Sky of Light Oberon. She has level 100 cranking as her best C and being anti-man due to, again, Koyan Sky of Light. So now on screen, we have the new numbers for her, and you can see there is a nice sizable bump up over the old numbers here. Old NP1 basically was at 251. New is at 335. So this is basically her with her fifth append there. Double Koyan Sky Oberon, still level 100 cranking. So none of the support setup has changed. The only thing that's changed here is the actual NP interlude and now the addition of new power mods. Plus, you can also get man attribute from Koyan Sky, so you're definitely going to have the potential to at least combine maybe one or multiple of these. And that's going to really help out her damage. You can see she's at that base 335. Definitely a nice one. Definitely something we like to see. And at NP2, she'd be all the way up at 419. Now, if we look at Ace in comparison, Ace still edging her out, still kind of the better unit, but this does make Summer Umu a lot more competitive with Ace. In that regard, I think I may be a little bit disappointed in the buff because it probably should have put Ace beyond, or Summer Caster for Umu a little bit beyond Ace, but it is what it is. So at the end of the day, I think that's just one of those things where like Ace is such a strong and synergistic unit, and Ace can touch Black Grail. So this is just naturally going to be one of those things that you'll encounter where there will be issues. But I do like this buff for Umu. It's just, to me, could have been maybe a tad bit stronger, but still a very solid one. Now, compared to someone like Tiamat, this is going to end up being one of the problems. Tiamat can manage 487 by wave 3. Now, you might be thinking like, okay, like that's absurd. That's way stronger. But keep in mind, Tiamat is a alter ego, so you've got the 1.5 times modifier on her at that point. So at least in that regard, if you're looking at like Summer Umu against an actual effective unit, she would be doubling her number. So you'd be looking at a little bit shy of 700k for her. Meanwhile, Tiamat kind of around that same ballpark. So what this actually does, it brings her a little bit more in line with Tiamat, though still maybe losing to Ace outright. Caster as well, definitely another interesting one. Now, where I think the issue will be for her is if you have that NP5 Caster, he is still going to win. So this is a nice buff, but to me, you can see why between Ace and Caster being her primary competition, maybe a little bit outside with Tiamat, why I feel like this buff, while nice for her, stops a little bit too short. I think they maybe needed to do a little bit more with her, give her a little bit more firepower to kind of help her pop off a little bit better. If you've managed to have her niches, she'll be fine, but if you don't have those niches, she's gonna kind of just end up being the inferior option to a couple of these others. So again, let me know what you guys think about the Caster Umu buff and whether or not you think they did a good job with it. Next up here, we have Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare's a rather interesting one. He has honestly been, for a while, a pretty decent low-star sport. He has charge, he has hard survival, and he has a party-wide steroid for one turn. I maybe would have liked to have seen the party-wide steroid get some attention here from the one turn duration, maybe to like multi-turn or increasing it up to a solid 50%. I don't really care, but I would have liked to have seen them maybe do that. But interestingly enough, they come into his second skill. This is his hard survivability. And this is the one that I didn't necessarily expect them to give attention to. So they actually tweak it and they basically say, hey, look, now we're going to make it so that he heals the entire party's HP by, again, 1500 here. He charges the entire party's gauge as well by an additional 10%. And he increases the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 20%. So this is intriguing because in a weird way, obviously NP damage up is something that's pretty meta right now with Oberon and the Buster systems and stuff like that. But you probably aren't necessarily going to be running someone like him alongside Oberon, though it's definitely a possibility. Where Shakespeare has always been good is actually for like one-shot damage comps, so things like raids and stuff like that, where you just need that one-turn steroid. He has been a pretty solid addition. He does also have the 20% charge for a target on his third skill. So what this in effect does is this just gives him more damage amplification capability across a 3-turn duration, and then adds in party charge to round him out to a nice even 30% for one target. In that regard, this is a much nicer buff for him. He's not going to be one of our new like 30% party chargers, but he can at least give one unit 30%, which, let's be honest, a lot of the time that's really all you need is for like the one unit to get it. So it is a really interesting buff for him, and I do really like it in that regard. But naturally, this also does impact himself. So on screen now, you guys can see Shakespeare's self buff only numbers. This is both before and after the change. Basically, we're just going to assume NP5 since he is a low star. Shakespeare originally was coming in at about 17.7k. Now is at about 21k. Definitely a nice improvement for him, even though to a large degree, a lot of people probably won't be using him for his damage output. Taking a look at him, technically you can pull off a actual proper system with him, though it does require something like K-Scope and basically Coin Sky of Light and 2 Oberons. But you can see his old numbers there, and now basically his new numbers by comparison. So he does get a little bit of a sizable bump up, and definitely could be a decent option for you, though a little bit this sort of thing is kind of overkill, and using the 2-star as the primary damage focus in a composition of all 5 stars otherwise definitely doesn't pass the smell test all the time. So it is what it is, but naturally this is just a damage increase for him, but also a damage increase for the party. So I do like this change for Shakespeare. It just makes him a little bit more viable, a little bit more usable, I would say. So let me know what you guys think about the Shakespeare buff, and if you feel like they did a good job for this one, or if you feel like somebody else was maybe negatively impacted by this buff. I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts, and it definitely is an interesting one there. And last but not least, we have the Darius buff. Now, this one, I don't think I necessarily had this one on my radar, other than I definitely had a Darius buff potentially being an option. He's someone that I've mentioned before that like his kit is extremely rudimentary. That's actually one of the reasons why I recommend a lot of low star like options, as him being one of them, because for like newer accounts, Darius is almost a free option for you. You basically just level him up, and then technically if you don't want to, you don't have to skill or level any of his skills rather in order to like make him succeed. And that's because even when they finally gave him a buff to his third skill, the steroid on it was not something that actually leveled based off of the level of the skill. So you just got guaranteed 20% buster resist down for 3 turns, and that made him an interesting option for, again, newer players that maybe aren't going to be swimming in resources. But to be honest, for a long time, Darius has actually provided pretty solid damage, and realistically, only if you could like invest deeply into Kiyohime could she kind of beat him in that regard. So I find it a little bit funny that this buff doesn't go to Kiyohime, because even though she did get a pretty interesting one before, she kind of could use another. But Darius, I think Darius was still my pick because, yeah, he hasn't really received much of anything else either, and his kit is just kind of painfully like simple. So they actually come in here and they buff his first skill, and you guys can see they took this skill from just a generic 3-turn NP gen up of 45% on a buster unit, and they change it to now he charges his own gauge by 30%. Now he manages to increase the party's buster performance by 20% for 3 turns. Now he increases the party's damage against enemies with lawful alignment for 3 turns. This is a huge expansion of capability for Darius at this point. Now he is a option for low star or again just like kind of easy sort of like single skill leveling in order to make him capable. Now all this entire skill is on a 6-turn cooldown, so in case you're curious, yes, you can 3-turn with Darius now. This vastly improves his potential to be used. And interestingly enough, this also gives him, again, that lawful niche that actually helps him stand out a little bit from the pack. It's not a super common niche to have, so this does make him a very interesting option for various quests and nodes. So what does this mean in terms of Darius's damage output? Well, before and after the buff here with self buffs only, you can see before he was at about 25k, after he's at about 29k, but then 37.7k lawful. Definitely an interesting setup in terms of his numbers now. But keep in mind too, this is a berserker. He's going to get that 1.5 times effectiveness. He's not going to be rolling around necessarily with the same 2 times effectiveness that an actual like devoted counter class would. So it is interesting to see, and he definitely projects strongly here. But this does naturally negatively impact several of the berserkers. And you might be thinking like, oh yeah, of course, like a unit like Spartacus, for instance, Darius now out damages and out charges. So definitely nice for Darius in that regard. But to a degree, that certainly hurts the utility and usefulness of someone like Spartacus. But to be fair, hey, he is a 3-star. He should be doing more damage than a 1-star at that point. So let's go ahead and let's look at his actual damage output. What does this look like? Well, we can work him with a level 100 cranking. That is a decent 50% starting charge CE for him. You would naturally have to have his mana loading append maxed out for something like this. But behold, as you do have double Coin Sky and Oberon coming in here with Darius, and these numbers are actually not atrocious. You manage to actually have decent output overall, assuming you're doubling up on his skills, at least with regards to his 3rd skill here. Because remember, the 3rd skill basically is a 20% buster resist down on an enemy, so it doesn't get carried through a wave, but it is a 6-turn cooldown itself, so it can also be doubled up. So naturally, as you look at that, that's why wave 1's a little bit higher than wave 2, because wave 2 won't have the same damage output as wave 1 due to not having that debuff since you popped it on turn 1, but now you get it back for turn 2. That means we get 217k right there against, you know, like still neutral numbers, which a berserker will almost never be at that point. But interesting to denote that, yeah, it's like you can take this number and multiply it by 1.5 and there's this actual output. This isn't gonna like destroy a bunch of like meta units or anything, but it is interesting to see the actual numbers here, doubly so in the lawful niche or man niche, as both of those are things he can easily obtain either through his own kit or through a Koyan Skya pairing there. And all of a sudden you now have the potential to double it up and those numbers start looking mighty respectable. So this is an intriguing buff for Darius, and it really brings him online. And for comparison's sake here is Morgan Le Fay. So I know a lot of people don't like to hear it because, you know, there have been calls for like Morgan to get buffed over the years. And I'm not going to say that Morgan like desperately has to, but I think it's pretty clear at this point that Morgan Le Fay outside of niche doesn't do that solid of damage. Now, you can make it so if you get additional MP levels or you're really just kind of like focusing on one of those niches. But to me, at the end of the day, Morgan Le Fay is useful because of how like kind of variable and flexible her kit is. That's really what makes her stronger. Giving her a little bit more damage wouldn't be that big of a deal, but I could definitely see how that would upset some of the other like fans of the other berserkers. So it is interesting to see at least that like Darius is now a little bit ascendant. He is rising into the ranks of being able to challenge at least the 5 stars. And that is intriguing to me nonetheless. So what do you guys think about the Darius update here? Are you going to be leveling up and luring your Darius? Or will you just kind of be sticking to your guns and using, you know, like your Morgan Le Fay or your like Arjuna Alter or anybody else? So be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. All in all, I think this round of buffs from the anniversary was very interesting. I think some of them are like perfect hits. Others are maybe possibly even a little too strong. And others are, hey, you know, maybe they just didn't really do enough. So they kind of ran the whole gambit here in terms of buffs. And overall, I'd give him kind of a B on this entire buff session. But I do think there's some really like bright shining points, but I also think there's some that I feel like could have been a little bit stronger, kind of like Caster Umu. So let me hear your thoughts on the overall stuff, and I will see you guys for the waiver video. Have a good one. Later. Give me that sweet view. I always appreciate it. So I'll see you guys for the next one. Have a good evening, and may the courts be with you.